I'm just saying, is it too much to ask that when you buy a story, it can be a single story, self-contained? I don't have to buy 12 other things?
Gospel according to Jeff. And with that, welcome to I'm Not Wrong. I'm Andrew. That's Jeff. We're talking again. We're happy you're here with us.
Yeah, thanks for
Anything I
listening.
missed?
Let's get into it because Andrew and I have talked about this a lot in our private lives, and we decided to let you all in on this conversation as well. I'm a big comic book fan, have been for the majority of my life, own a significant amount of comic books. Andrew, I don't know if you were a big comic book fan earlier in your life, but I know you've gotten into them in recent times, and you've been diving into TMNT. Good choice to dive into. Good.
Turtles, for those that don't speak acronym, Teenage Mutant Ninja variety of Turtles. Yeah, good time. Favorite from the childhood. Been having a blast with it. And your open is relevant because what got me rehooked, as you well know, is The Last Ronin. Highly recommended. Very good story. Perfect. Self-contained story. Key theme. Why do I mention self-contained? Well, I got the Armageddon game because it's from Mr. Waltz, who was associated with The Last Ronin, longtime scribe. I'm like, let's go. I believe, I trust. I will not be steered wrong. I dive into the hardcover, which she didn't bark, great, but it is a hardcover. It is a combined, I think it's 8 or 13 comics, either way, individual compressed into one in order to attempt to tell a story. I say attempt because let me show you what happens in the first 22 pages.
Please do.
Page 2, little footnote, tie-in for TMNT City at War. Okay, pause. City at War, I have it. It's a little glary.
Kind of coincidental you have it as well, correct? I don't think you bought it because of that.
100%. I only got it because I like the number and I thought the cover was cool because it looks like number 1. It came out in 1992 and it's one of 13 in the City at War story.
So for reference, when did Armageddon game come out?
2023.
Yeah, so a 30-year gap just about in those comics.
30 years off the jump. And it's a bit of a summarization point and they kind of gloss it. I'm like, okay, but not the best start. Same page, 2 panels down, they reference Armageddon Game's opening moves. What's that? I don't have that. I just have Armageddon Games. They didn't include opening moves. But it gets better, because on page 5, we're referencing Armageddon Game pregame, which is not opening moves. That is a different piece of the Armageddon Game story that isn't included in the Armageddon Game hardcover. And now we're just going to go off the rails, because page 6, we're referencing Kingdom of Rats, which is another standalone storyline that introduces the Rat King, which is fairly important, and they gloss over it pretty hard to the point of you only learn he's immortal because of an introductory like footnote cast of characters page. I'm like, that's relevant. Easily missed. And then we reference TMNT 131 and 132, just random issues that came out in like 2002. TMNT 109 so that we can hit Dimension X. And then 122 is needed as well in order to completely grasp where we are within the first 2 comics of what is allegedly the Armageddon Game story. I think I missed the story because it's included in the footnotes that I don't own.
Yeah, see, and that's, again, as a comic book guy, it's something, you telling me that, it didn't surprise me when you mentioned it to me, but I understand your frustration because that's a thing that's been going on for decades. And it's really bad when you're trying to read a comic that's now out of print, right? Which you would think, I go by in industry speak, that's called a trade paperback most of the time. In your case, it's a hardcover, so it's a trade hardcover. But trade paperbacks are typically where they combine a large number of issues to either put a run together, or in some cases they do it in volumes if it's a ton of comics. But so you don't have to go buy the individual comics. And it's typically, if you're going to go buy that, you are expecting that I'm gonna have a self-contained story now. I can read this from start to finish. Last Ronin, to your point, is a great example. I have Last Ronin #1 that I bought when it first came out. But I read The Last Ronin in a hardcover edition all together. And it's great because, to your point, it's just those comics. It's only like 5 issues, and it's just boom, boom, boom. I've got the story. I don't need external stuff. But it's really irritating because, like, I haven't read as much TMNT actually as you have. As much as I know love comics, I have not read as many TMNT comics as you have at this point because my big jam growing up, I'm a diehard Turtles fan. Everything I had was Turtles. But
Mm-hmm.
I read
Then you transition to the Bat.
But exactly. And then, but from a comic perspective, I was much more of a Batman kid.
Yeah.
DC Comics, Batman, Justice League, specifically Batman, but a lot of Justice League. And like the immediate thing that I think of is DC Comics has done a lot of crises. There's Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis. Those are the big things. It's not a crisis till Flash dies. But
Pause. Nope, we have to call a timeout. I'm throwing a flag on the field right now. And listeners, viewers, whichever you may be, you don't know this, but Jeff's jam is Long Halloween. I got a trade softback, whatever, paperback, whatever he said it was, of it.
Trade paperback.
How heavy is this going to reference? Because Batman goes back to like 40 something, 30,
1939. It was first appearance.
So, is this going to piss me off? I need to know now.
Because the Long Halloween. So you got into it's funny you mentioned that's my jam. It's my jam in the sense that that's a specific run I've been trying to get my hands on all the first printings of for a while because I've got a lot of the other stuff I was looking for. Story-wise, it's not my favorite Batman story. It's a good one. It's not my favorite, just for reference. But that said, to answer your question, Long Halloween is self-contained. So you'll be all good to read that story. It is one single story that was done. Because those do exist in the Batman universe, but the problem is a lot of times they don't. And I'm going to go back to Final Crisis, an example. One of the biggest events in DC Comics history happened in the, I want to say late 90s. The actual age of that comic escapes me now. It's got to be late 90s. And I have them all. But Final Crisis was led into by 52, which was 52 weekly issues of comics, all about the world without the Trinity, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and a bunch of things happening with the heroes. And then there was Prelude to Final Crisis, I want to say it's called. I have all these. I should have gotten my own props, but I didn't, because I would have had to dig through a lot of comic book boxes. But like, then there was the Prelude to Final Crisis. Then there was Final Crisis, which is just 7 issues. But within Final Crisis, those 7 issues main run is the story, quote unquote, similar to Armageddon Game. However, to really follow the story, you also had to buy the Superman comics that were coming out at the time, the action comics that were coming out at the time, Detective Comics, Batman comics, Wonder Woman comics, Sensational comics, Green Lantern. All the comics that were in the DC universe that were coming out at that time had story tie-ins to Final Crisis. So every single issue of every major DC character was a Final Crisis thing that was tied in. You can argue it wasn't essential to the story, but you miss things in the story if you don't go and buy this comic that you never would have bought otherwise.
I would say that is slightly more forgivable in my mind, just because I'm assuming like the Supermans, the Batmans, the Wonder Womans, the DC, it was all coming out at that same time period.
It was. So that is better than what you've got where they're referencing a 30-year-old comic. That is unique. I've done a lot of comic books, and that's unique. The fact that it's referencing a comic that's literally 30 years old is surprising for a tie-in, because that's not a tie-in.
And to be fair, it's not like you are completely devoid of context if you don't know this story. But like for the one that pops into my mind, I'm looking at my little notes here. TMNT City at War. That's where they end up going up north for a bit to train. They say as much. And they're like, yeah, we went up there to train for situations like this. And it's kind of left vague. I'm like, well, I wish it wasn't so vague.
Which I knew what they did, yeah.
Also, I'm not going to start hunting even more crap. Like, this is a gateway drug, and I do not support this behavior.
Yeah, so I will say, like you said, I mean, Final Crisis as the example, it was all coming out at the same time. So it wasn't as bad if you were, but I went back and repurchased a lot of that stuff when I got back into collecting, call it 10 years ago. So I went on it gave me something to look for, which was fun, but I went and bought all those tie-ins. If you were buying it at the time, it was okay, except now you're buying comics. The problem for me is now you're buying things I wouldn't buy. Like, I don't typically buy Superman comics. I've never been a fan of Superman. Now, we both have a mutual friend who's a big time Superman fan. He and I have traded major Batman issues for major Superman issues and things in the past because he doesn't care about Batman. But I don't typically buy those comics. So now I've got to go spend money I wouldn't have spent on a comic book I don't really want, so I can read this one tiny little tie-in story. That's where it becomes a problem to me. You're right. It's not as hard to go get because it's not 30 years old, but now you're saying, well, this story is spread across 37 things that you didn't need.
Yeah, I would say I think my complaint is overall accessibility. In that, at least with what you were saying, in my mind, less bad because same time frame. In the terms of like Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least everything they were doing was happening in the movies. Once it started tying into TV shows, lost me completely. Like, I think that's why Phase
That's
2,
a good
3 never
example.
really.
And that's a good example. Let's talk expanded universe for a minute, because the whole idea of this, like the cinematic universe, or DC called it their expanded universe at one point. Like, DC's changed DC is probably the most poorly run intellectual property on earth. I would say hands down, nobody can compete with DC in blowing up valuable IP. Batman is arguably the most valuable intellectual property in the world. Batman is the far and away the most popular comic book character, and his movies always do the best. And somehow they've mismanaged that. Superman is ubiquitous in culture, even in places where they don't know American comics. Everybody knows who Superman is, and they've messed up that. So DC is completely poorly managed. We can debate that now if you want, or later.
The only one that remotely comes to my mind would be Sony's handling of Spider-Man.
Sony's handling of Spider-Man is also abysmal, but because
they're in and out.
But because Spider-Man, like, they only have him and his like cadre of characters, as opposed to DC owns their entire catalog, I would say DC's been more mismanaged. But yes, the Sony handling of Spider-Man has also been abysmal. Which is funny because actually Sony's movies for Spider-Man, like, I will say right now, I'll put it out there to the universe, the best Spider-Man movies, bar none, are the two Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. They get regularly crapped on, but are far and away the best actual films.
I haven't seen them recently enough to have a strong opinion, because honestly, the last time I saw either Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man was in
No
the
Way Home.
latest Spidey.
Yeah.
And it was so much nostalgia. I was like, they were all great in their own way.
And that movie, admittedly, that movie was good. And I don't dislike the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, but Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies are probably the most canonically accurate to the Peter Parker character. Tobey Maguire's people like, and myself included, from a nostalgia perspective of, you brought Spidey to the big screen and it was good. But there's a lot of issues with those movies in terms of the way they were done canonically to the character. Andrew Garfield's is much more accurate. I like his version of Peter Parker. I think they're the best movies. Regardless, my point was simply Sony's mishandled it, but somehow also has made good films. All that aside.
And even their animated Spideys were pretty highly regarded.
The Spider-Verse stuff, the Miles Morales. If they ever come out with the final one, The first two are good. The last one got massively delayed because of one of the voice actors, like, sexual assault allegations or something like that, and so that super delayed the movie. But I did like the first two, and I'm interested to see the last one when and if it comes out. Anyway, back to the topic at hand: expanded universes, because everyone's done it. I agree with you. Marvel actually at first was laying a really good foundation and a really good groundwork. Like, I remember seeing Iron Man when it first came out, and like the tease at the end for the Avengers was huge. I'm not a big Marvel fan. I never have been, but I'm a comic book kid. I grew up around the comic culture. I know Marvel characters, right?
And did Marvel start that little teaser at the end credit trend. I'm trying to think if it happened before. I think it happened with the Star
Post-credit scenes
Wars.
had been a thing before, but Marvel, at least in my mind, from what I can recall and what I believe, Marvel started the trend where like now I can't get up at the end of a movie until I get on my phone and be like, "Is there a post-credit scene?" Regardless of the movie, literally every movie I go to, I have to. Is there a post-credit scene? Because they've made it so common.
And And to their credit, though, like the Marvel stuff did advance the plot in pretty meaningful ways, but
Yeah, the Marvel
not
post-credit scenes used to
ways.
be good. I mean, like
Yes.
now a lot of them are just stupid, but for a while it was like it was really important because like if you didn't see the scene with Nick Fury at the end of Iron Man, you missed something significant. They were building towards the Avengers
Or at
initiative.
the end of one of the Hulks,
At the
the
end of the
general
Hulk, yeah,
sitting
the
drunk
Edward
in the
Norton
bar,
the Edward
Tony
Norton
Stark
Hulk,
walks
yeah.
in. Yeah, I always thought the future was hardware, not software.
Yeah, so like I think but you're right, where they started to have a problem is then they started to say like you need to be also watching these these shows, which started with they had Hulu shows before Disney Plus existed. People don't remember this because a lot of people think of the Disney Plus shows, but Marvel first had like Agents of Shield that was out on Hulu and ABC.
Netflix.
Oh, and they had
Netflix.
the Netflix. Well, but see, but that was a problem because they had the Netflix shows, but the Netflix shows weren't connected to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Daredevil for
It is
Netflix
now,
was not
though.
part of the MCU.
He is now, though.
He is now, but that's what I was like. So they started to immediately create problems because they had things that were and were not canonical to their universe, and so they were like all the Jessica Jones,
Luke
the
Cage was
Iron
great. Jessica
Fist.
Jones was good too. Yeah, Iron Fist is the only one they can drop. They can recast, redo that one completely.
Yeah, I mean I
That
don't
was
like
just
Iron Fist. I think he's a stupid character.
oh god, it was awful. It was awful.
But like all of those were originally they. I think they've been recanonized to
Hmm.
use that term into the MCU. But originally they were not part of the MCU because Marvel, some way or another, did not own the rights to those shows. That's why they
Yeah.
were on Netflix, and so they were completely independent, which is why Daredevil was a lot grittier when it was on Netflix than what they've done on the Disney Plus. But then so they had all those things and you had to figure out what were and then like when Disney Plus came out they went hardcore like we're going to have like 3 shows and a movie and if you didn't see everything you didn't know what was going on. And it got to the point where like that was also coincidentally the same time like that was post Endgame a lot of it, which is the same time when myself and a lot of fans walked away from the
Myself as
MCU and
well.
like we're done with this. You've gone too far with it.
What I don't even think it was beyond that. The story that we were invested in reached its natural conclusion. Like they never succeeded in making us care about anybody beyond, the original trio of Marvel, which was Cap, Thor, and Iron Man.
So I think you're right. Yeah, that's the problem because like in theory they should have been able to go post Endgame because comics do, but they didn't get you invested in any character. The only character you were really invested in as a casual fan, especially like there are still MCU diehards. They exist.
Hmm.
I consider them more content of like more just content consumers that will consume anything that's put in front of them because objectively the films have gotten worse. But let's get out of that for a minute and just say like there are people, but casual fans, the only person you were invested in outside of the big 3 that you just named was Spider-Man because Spider-Man has historically always been
Well,
the biggest character for Marvel, but they don't own Spider-Man.
Spider-Man and rest in peace, Chadwick, Black Panther. Black Panther, that first one was great. They could have, I think, done gangbusters because he was supposed to be part of the backbone along with Jonathan Majors as Kang for Phase 2, which didn't work out for a completely different set of reasons. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why kind of MC went off the rails to me, but I wanted to touch on, what I think is the bigger, broader cardinal sin, and that is taking your universe, your media realm too big, too broad, too far reaching. And the biggest offender in my mind, Jeff, Final Fantasy 15. I like the game overall. I hate with the burning fire of a thousand suns the overall delivery of it. Because if you're not familiar, in order to completely have the story, you need a movie, a 6-part anime, a book, a manga, 2 mobile games, a demo that led into the main game known as a platinum demo that was the main character's life before the start of the main game. The main game, which, cost $60 and was somehow a finished product, question mark. And then they released DLC after the fact that filled in the blank and told you what your characters did in these large gaps in the story. And then they released a prologue DLC because it did such a poor job explaining the actual ending. And then season 2 of it all got killed. So they put that into another book release. What are we doing?
So I agree with you. Like, that's the best example by far. I did not know all of those aspects, right? I knew that Final Fantasy 15 had the anime and the movie, and I knew there were the mobile games. I didn't know all those pieces, but I agree with like that you've made that makes to use your point from earlier, the accessibility. That's where the problem comes in. Because even the MCU, one of the problems I had with it is like it started to become inaccessible. You've got things spread out in too many places. You're making it too hard for casual fans to stick with this product, because the assumption now is that this is the thing that these people are dedicating every bit of time to. Final Fantasy 15, the same thing. Now you're saying that all of my free time is Final Fantasy 15. It's not a realistic way to sell a product, for one, and it's also just not realistic to the way media is consumed.
It feels so targeted at the diehards, and I can kind of appreciate it in a sense, but really overall, you lost something in the main game because of how forced some of these media tie-ins, like massive cinematic events, like in the game, the death of your father, the overthrow of your kingdom. It's like a 15-second
Yeah, and that's the
little
thing. Like,
cutscene in game because it ties into the movie, and then your significant other boothing her. That's very truncated because that really ties into like the anime for the full story. What are we doing?
yeah, and that's the
And
problem.
it's
Because
the
like
cost of it as well, man.
because
Like,
I'm good with you. I'm with you. I'm good with it. Like, if you want to give extra stuff to there are diehard fans in every genre, and if you want to do
Mhm.
stuff that like the diehards are going to get into, that's where you put like Easter eggs and stuff like that. Where it's like that's what the MCU used to be really good at. Is there would be things that like if you're a diehard comics fan, then like I remember that thing from this comic from 20
I
years
know
ago.
this
But
guy.
but
Yeah,
when you make
absolutely.
it something critical to everyone to see that, to understand it, that's different. Like making an Easter egg so the diehards get a little bit of extra juice, so to speak. Cool. Making a little bit of extra content that they can go and enjoy, and like, hey, you want to dive deeper into this aspect of the story? We've given you the opportunity to do that, but you can't do that at the detriment of the overall product. Which, in the case of Final Fantasy 15, the
Mm.
primary product is the singular game. Everything else should be external to that, and like it can add to the experience, but it should not detract from the experience if I did not consume that.
Yeah, like major plot points can't be buried in other media. If you want like minor secondary quests that kind of like will be like, oh my God, this is such an important thing. And if you don't want to give it like a full MacGuffin treatment and give it backstory, do that in some type of, secondary side quest, tie-in, video game, whatever.
Yeah, like here's an example of where I think that was done actually fairly well. And so I'm sure you'll know the game, Arkham Knight, Batman Arkham Knight, the third of the
Hmm.
Arkham trilogy, right?
Hmm.
Objectively, actually, in my opinion, the worst one, for a number of reasons. It was super hyped. I was super excited about it. It wasn't great, but anyway, they came out with a lot of people probably don't even know this. Again, was buying comics at the time. They came out with a comic book run leading into the release of that game. You didn't need to read that comic book to play the game and understand everything in the story of the game. But if you did, it did give some extra context to stuff. It gave some extra cool stuff. So it was something for diehards that wanted to see it, and it was a thing you could do. But if you didn't do it, you could easily understand the plot. Another good example that just popped in my head, the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars cartoon added some context, added some really good content to a Star Wars diehard that wanted to see Anakin Obi-Wan fighting in the Clone Wars. You did not need to see it to understand the jump from episode 2 to episode 3.
Correct. And I had two different ideas for times where it's been done well, where they do nerd service, but also still deliver a finished, complete, great product. One, Lord of the Rings. You have the real version and then what they originally released to theaters for people. Yeah, but then you have the real version, which is what you should be watching. They're a bit longer and they're awesome. And the other one, and it broaches because it was in a lot of different media formats, but it was never critical, was The Matrix.
Yeah, the Matrix is a good one because they had the Animatrix, which was really good. They had the game, which I can't remember the name of, but I had for Xbox or
Enter the
whichever console it was
Matrix,
on.
I
Enter the
believe.
Matrix, yeah. That was and you're right. That all provided additional content, additional. It provided
It
additional
was
context to the
flavor.
story. But if I didn't play or watch those, I could walk into the Matrix films and still understand the story completely.
And it almost begs the question to me, and I'm sure this is the answer, and it's just so basic and obvious, but like, is greed the motivator? We think we can make more if we tie in certain elements into this in order to make it almost a necessity versus an option.
So my gut wanted to say yes, but here's where I'm actually going to say no.
Oh, riddle
Because
me why,
we
Batman?
talked about this a little bit before, and I didn't see myself coming at it from this angle. But again, comic book fan my entire life, manga
Hmm.
fan the last maybe 15 years. Have watched, I dabbled in anime and stuff as a kid. I think every millennial watched Dragon Ball Z. I would be shocked if you told me you were a millennial boy that did not watch Dragon Ball Z on Toonami. If you didn't, you were either a massive loser or you didn't have television. Like I would be shocked if you told me you grew up in the 90s and you didn't after school watch Toonami.
Yeah, I mean, God, you just start screaming and go, ah, everybody knows you're going Super
Yeah,
Saiyan.
like it's over
Everyone.
9,000 was a thing that was everywhere in our life. Before
I mean,
memes, that was a meme.
would people in your school just be standing around doing the spirit bomb pose?
Sometimes.
Okay,
Like,
good.
I
Just
mean,
checking.
that's what I'm saying. Like I watched some anime and stuff, but I was not, and like I am a big time anime fan now and a big time manga fan now. I read more manga than I read American comic books. I watch more anime than I watch any type of American comic book content, because for a lot of reasons, I think that the product is better. I really do, and that's why I'm going to say no. I don't think it's greed, and the reason I say that is I've looked at opening a comic book store a number of times. I've run the numbers. I've gotten deep into the analysis to get ready to open a store. And the thing that you can go and look, anyone watching or listening to this right now, if you don't trust this, go and look up articles. You'll find it very quickly. The American comic book industry is dying. The comic book store is dying. The stores that are succeeding are selling manga. They're selling statues from manga, from anime. They're selling things that appeal to that genre because American comic books, for a lot of reasons that I won't bother to get into, are dying. But because of that, I don't think it is greed. I think it's hubris. I think it's generated by greed. I think the idea in like Disney and Marvel's head and Warner Brother DC's head is that if we make more stuff, we'll make more money. But so greed might be the overall motivator, but I think it's misplaced greed because if they stepped back and looked and analyzed and said, because the head of DC Comics very recently came out in an interview and it essentially said manga's kicking our butts. He like I'm paraphrasing. There's an interview that I will link in the comments of this video that you can go out and read, and it's interesting because he openly admits like the Japanese comic market is killing American comics. And
And
so if you can do that analysis, greed says just saying I want to make more money, you should step back and say what are they doing differently than us? And what they do differently is their stories are singular. They do not do tie-ins. They do not have multiple authors. They have one story.
that's what I was going to ask actually, because it would not even beyond tie-ins. It was going to be like the multiple authors. How many dimensions and universes are currently going in One Piece?
One.
You held up two.
Well, I held up one on two hands. One. There's one. And it's all one guy's vision. And like even you can it is funny that it is, you're right, but it's just one piece, which is about to break. It is now the number one selling manga of all time. It is about to surpass Superman and Batman as the best selling fictional work of all time. It is And it is, I believe, already the best-selling fictional work by a single author of all time.
But isn't it kind of interesting that we earlier mentioned Dragon Ball Z?
I was going to get to that in a
And
second.
Dragon Ball is one of the most non-continuous, like linear stories in my mind. And is that because it became so Americanized?
So Dragon Ball is interesting. There's actually a specific reason behind it. So Dragon Ball is interesting for two things. One, Dragon Ball is an exception to the manga rule of this happens occasionally in manga, but
I'm
not
only
often,
thinking of the
of a
anime, to
single
be
author.
honest.
It's an exception because it's not a single author because they've continued Dragon Ball now. Akira Toriyama died last
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
But the guy who's doing it, again, something very common in Japan, not in the United States, the guy who continued Dragon Ball was the apprentice of Akira Toriyama, who was given his blessing to continue the thing before he died. He had already started writing the Dragon Ball Super manga for Toriyama way before his death. So that's one thing that's a little bit different because you're right. Like Ichiro Oda is the only one who's written One Piece. No one else has. Toriyama's much older though, and Dragon Ball's been around longer. It's continuing, but it's continuing with somebody who was given his specific blessing and has his vision. The other thing that's interesting about Dragon Ball is Dragon Ball, because it was so big, both worldwide and in Japan, the reason it kept going when like Toriyama ended the story, then he would do it again, and he ended the story. That was partially because he'd get new ideas. Like Z was a continuation of Dragon Ball's because he got an idea. GT was something he never approved. GT is non-canon, and it's because
GT is the quest for money.
because it
Call
was
what
so
is.
valuable that the Japanese, and this is a real thing, that when the Japanese government needed to stimulate the Japanese economy, they would release new Dragon Ball content.
I knew that.
So some of it is just like, yeah, it was greed, and they were like, "Hey, we need something." Toriyama refuses to make it. We're making GT, and then he came out with Super decades later, largely because he hated GT so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And-
it is
okay,
interesting,
so,
but it's still singular for the most part. Still a singular story, whereas Batman's been written by 100 or more
okay.
authors over the course of 80 years.
But I guess my other follow-up then would be as I do not get into manga at all, One Piece, that seems more exception to the rule than the rule. And this is purely speculatory on my part, but I mean, is that the case? Like,
In what way?
no guest authors, singular continuous runs. Like, I'm guessing because like I watch JJK, that's one homie. I'm watching Solo Leveling, that's one guy. So yeah, I think that maybe the
Yeah, so
continuity just is better.
so to answer your question, because again, I know enough about manga, I think I can answer
Yeah.
this fairly
Yeah, that's honest.
intelligently. It's an exception to the rule in how long it's gone on.
Okay.
One Piece is one of very few manga that's gone on for as long as it has. It's over 25 years old. There are a couple others, Detective Conan, which is one of the other super long running ones. Hajime no Ippo is also super long running.
I
Berserk.
think it's the TV show, but didn't the Power Rangers, like Japanese equivalent, just end after like 50 years of
I
TV
believe
or
that's
something?
the case, yeah.
Oh.
But so it is. One Piece is an exception to the rule in the fact, and there are a few other exceptions in how long it's gone. But almost every popular manga that I'm aware of has a single author. And the one thing that I think makes manga better than American comics is why I've shifted towards reading more of that stuff is they end. Like the problem with Batman, I love Batman. Batman was my thing my entire childhood. It was Turtles and Batman. You look at my bedroom, you look at the toys I got. It was either Batman or Ninja Turtles, and there was Star Wars as well sprinkled in. But the problem is, like, to your point, there's a million continuities. There's, like, if I were to tell you what the official continuity is for Batman, there's also a billion offshoots that are not official, but have been written and are very popular. I can tell you the official continuity, but it's been it's also been changed a number of times. And anytime they end a story, they just start it again. Whereas manga, like Jujutsu Kaisen, which you mentioned, that ended. It's done. The story is over. Because the author told a story, he got to where he wanted to end it, and he ended it. My Hero Academia ended. All of them end. One
Yeah,
Piece
but
hasn't
MHA
ended.
was also, that took what, 15, 20 years?
What, JJK?
No, MHA.
Oh, no, MHA was maybe 10 years,
Huh.
9 or 10 years.
Either way.
It was not that old. It was,
Oh, okay.
it was post, so like there's the big three for Shonen Jump was Naruto, One Piece, and Bleach.
Bleach.
MHA started after all of those.
Oh, okay.
MHA actually, it might have only run 7 years when all said and done. I'd have to go look. It's not super
Nice.
old. I was reading manga by the time that started,
Yeah, the
and I haven't been
gap
reading manga
between
that long.
the Bleach anime ending and Thousand Year Blood War beginning was, I think, 10 years. So yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
Long
like,
hiatus.
but I think to me that's a big thing though is they have a story and they get to an end and it's more like it's more like a novel. When a novelist writes a story and it's over, it's just over. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing to have a story end. It's actually, I think, gratifying as a fan, as a reader, to get to that conclusion. American comics are so much about continuing, always having new story. And look, I've bought into that. I've bought a lot of stuff over the years, but as I've gone away from it, the thing I've realized is like one of the things that draws me to One Piece, and I'm going to hit One Piece specifically because I am a big One Piece fan. But one of the things that draws me to One Piece is it's got a singular thread and it's working towards a conclusion. When it ends, it's over.
And see, in the universe I'm into right now, near as I can tell, doesn't have a singular direction, focus, or plan, and I just don't care. Warhammer, baby.
See, but it doesn't because Warhammer's more
But,
about
but
selling
here's how
Warhammer's
I
more about
will
selling the models than it is about a story. The story has come along as a consequence of that.
here's what I will say in defense of, because we've kind of complained a bit about a multimedia approach when admittedly Space Marines 2 is what got me into broader Warhammer. But I think how I kind of differentiate it is from some of the things I've been talking about is Batman, One Piece, the Turtles, it's very singularly character driven and focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's kind of pulling me into Warhammer is it's just the universe, the setting, the place. Like the people can change drastically, wildly, but we're still within roughly the same realm. And I
So
think that flexibility and variability gives it a lot of, freedom, but at the same time acts as like a loose glue to tie everything together. Because, like, for example, Space Marines 2, I made one of my guys all armored up, look like a space wolf because I like dogs and it reminded me of a dog. I had some headcanon stuff that I quickly learned was not true, and it's all a very brutal place to live. And I was like, ooh, I would like to learn more. And now I'm like 400 pages in. But they somehow, at least from my view, avoid some of the sins because it's all completely optional. And depending on what thread you pull, it's not related to anything over here. Like my next stop is probably like a Blood Raven, like a Blood Angels book. Sorry, Blood Angels omnibus book. No relation to Space Wolves outside of same Emperor.
so I am not nearly as
So give
deep
me, yeah,
in.
so give me your perspective because you have a different view of the world as somebody who's dabbled with like figures and I know your brothers are super into tabletop and stuff.
So I'm definitely not as deep into the lore at this point, even probably as you. I know enough about the Warhammer lore to I would say to be dangerous to like fake my way
Mhm.
through. And I'm definitely not. I mean, the lore master of Warhammer's lore, if we wanted to have a Warhammer discussion, would be our former co-host and friend Hot Pocket Matt. That's his life. Like Blood Angels is his jam. So if I don't know if he's the one who recommended that to you or not, but Blood Angels is his thing.
Yeah,
But I know enough
we've
about
talked.
Warhammer through both reading wikis for like hours on end. I was on a trip to Germany for work about a year ago where I was bored, had nothing to do. I spent like 5 days at work in Germany in the office just reading Warhammer stuff to understand the lore. So I know enough. Um, but I think you said a couple things that are important is one, I agree with you. It's not critically important to be able to consume one piece of the media to be able to enjoy the other. Like you can play the game without really being deep in the lore. Now, most of the people who buy the models and play the game, from the ones I've met, seem to be very like that gets you in and it's a gateway drug to getting deep into that world. But it doesn't, you don't have to. You can just do the thing. Or you can just play Space Marine on your Xbox or your PS5 and like you can just play the game without getting deep into it. But it tends to be a gateway drug into it. The other thing I would liken Space Marine in a way, so I do not mean this as literal as it will sound, but in a way I would liken it to the Lord of the Rings. In the fact that one of the things that makes it work, now Lord of the Rings was a singular man's vision. So that's unique in the fact that it was all Tolkien's singular vision, and then his son carried that torch forward after his death, and his son protected his vision. So Warhammer's not that. It's been cobbled together by a large group of people over time. But
Many nerds.
but where I think it's similar is the fact that it's very reliant on and true to its established lore and history. So whenever something new is introduced, they try to work it into what is established, what exists. Whereas comic books, to our point, is they just say, well, that didn't happen, we're doing this now.
I really hope that we get a good viewership because somewhere somebody is going to be going rabid at that statement about they don't check. You know what the new like? I just got a rant from your brother about some
I'm
lady
aware of
custodians.
some of the big gripes going on in the Warhammer universe that I won't get into, like the Custodes thing and all that.
Yeah,
But
that's
by
because that
and
could be
large,
our next show about how nerds inherently love to complain about things.
but it's also, I mean, there's also, we could also do an entire show about whether or not gatekeeping is a good thing in a hobby, because to some extent, I'm going to say yes. I don't think it's entirely, but I do think like people who care about the lore, protecting it and saying like that doesn't work and have it and like forcing that to be understood, I don't think that's a bad thing entirely. Like, I'm a big fan of Tolkien stuff. For that reason, I do not like The Rings of Power because it completely ignores everything he wrote.
That could be a fun follow-up discussion because I like the idea of again the universe, a good universe. You can go in many different directions, like the Star Wars expanded universe, the holy grail of like my young universal mind
That's actually
that's
a
now
great
gone,
example of
R.I.P.
when it was done well and then it was completely thrown away.
Yes. Then it was lit on fire out of spite and hate and
But that's a perfect
can't have
example of why I think, to my point, and we don't have time to get deep into it, why I think gatekeeping to a level, like, I don't think gatekeeping should be so necessary that, like, you keep people from getting into your new hobby. But I do think there's a level of, like, hey, we built this and we love it, and don't come in and just trash it out of spite because you want it to be something else. If you want it to be something else, go make that other thing.
yeah, we just need to get to that level where we can kind of accept like it's never appropriate to send death threats to child actors on social media because of portrayals in nerd shows. Like, that's a
Yeah,
bridge
so
too
yeah,
far.
that's a level of gatekeeping I agree with you on. I'm more saying like people like when Disney started buying Star Wars and changing all the stuff, like I do think it would have been okay for more fans to stand up and be like, "Hey, the stuff that exists is good. You don't need to throw it all away just because you want to do something new."
Yeah, agreed. I just question, at that point, the good it would have done.
Wait, it wouldn't have with that group with the people who were running Disney. That's a whole separate thing. But I get my point
Now,
is
now we can make a difference. Nerds have been empowered and are like cool and stuff, and it's all very mainstream.
my agreed. My overall point though is like I do think I think that's why Warhammer, to your point, works with multiple authors and things, is because they are to some extent, and again, yes, they diverge from that to sometimes and things like that. But for the most part, those authors are told like you can't go and rewrite the Horus Heresy as an example. Like you have to, these things happened, they're established, and you can't go and change that.
Horus Heresy. Hilarious you bring that up. I have created a cardinal sin, sir. Let me show you.
Okay.
I There was a reference in my Space Wolves book about the Horus Heresy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I knew you bought that.
I didn't know it was like book 1 of 40. Bruh.
But I think that's where tie-ins can work, though, is where you're holding to a cohesive thread. Like, you got to hold this. I think that, to me, is where the conversation, where I would say, let's leave it for tonight, is like, tie-ins can be done really well if you have if you have a theme you're holding to, and you say, like, we're not going to diverge from that. Because the problem is when you get the tie-ins and it's like, everybody can do whatever they want, and then we're going to try and tie it all together and into a nice little bow, but it doesn't actually work. It doesn't make sense. But here you go. Here's your stuff.
And keep all the critical plot points to 1, 2 types of media
Yeah.
max.
Yeah, the critical plot points need to be in the main, whatever the main thing you're selling, whether it's a video game, a movie, that's where everything big goes, and everything else becomes extra for the people who want to pursue it. But it shouldn't be something I have to see to understand. If I need to watch 12 other hours of something to understand your 2-hour movie, I just won't watch your 2-hour movie.
It really makes you wonder about some of the people who like I heard about opening night. People are like, oh my gosh, I've heard so many good things about like these movie series. This is the first one. I'm like,
I do wonder about that sometimes. Like, it'd be like going to the Return of the King if you hadn't seen any of the other Lord of the Rings. Like, why? Why are you stepping at the? I went to the first Star Wars movie I decided to watch was Return of the Jedi. Like, what? What?
spoilers.
Like, I do find it weird. Like, that's not a media, that's not the company's problem anymore. Now that's just your media literacy. Like, who jumps in? Well, I bought the third book in this series. Like, there's two before that, right? Like, that
Yeah.
they build stories build. They're progressing. I do think that's just like that's illiteracy of people.
Yeah, that's just a media literacy problem. And that is not on the publishers or on us to fix. So yeah, just
Correct.
an amusing thought that popped in my mind because yeah, the people sitting next to me, thank God they stopped, but I went to many showings opening weekend, and one of them sitting next to a couple, and yeah, neither of them had seen it either. They had just knew that everybody wanted to go see it, and I'm like, if they ask me a single question,
I do
well,
hate that. I hate people who talk during movies at theaters anyway. I've nearly gotten in multiple fights over it.
straight to jail.
Yes. Like that really should be like you need to not be if you want to do that, watch a movie at home. That's what streaming's for. I don't care if you pause it, whatever. If you're at home, you can do whatever you want. When I'm
Okay,
in a movie
last
theater and I
one.
paid to watch it, I want you to be shut up. I want to hear the movie.
Last one though. What is an acceptable amount of noise in a horror movie? If you're in the audience, like the people that like, I've heard people cry during the first Paranormal Activity.
I think an
Like,
acceptable level is a gasp. Like I think laughter in a movie is always acceptable, whatever the movie, because there's always like there have been a few movies that made me absolutely laugh out loud, and a few of them have been horror. Me and my brother laughed out loud at Nosferatu, and I don't remember what scene it was. I just remember it was so stupid that we were laughing out loud, and we were the only ones in the theater laughing, and we realized that. But so like I think gasps are okay in a horror movie. I think the occasional even scream where you can see that somebody's kind of like actually reacting to a jump scare. I'm not a big fan of the people yelling, "Don't go in there, don't go in there," like screaming at the movie theater. Like, first of all, they cannot hear you, and second of all, it's obnoxious. And I'm going to say
it's
this is
fun.
less horror
Third of
movies.
all, borderline involuntary reaction for some people.
I'm going to say this is less horror movies, but comic book movies. This is my last thing. Like the thing is, this is a pet peeve of mine. I realize it's a very common thing, and I don't know why it is. Is at the end of comic book movies when people applaud or give standing ovations. It's not a live performance. They don't know. You look stupid. I think it's insanely dumb to applaud a film. Unless you're like at con or something where the cast of the movie is watching it with you, like you're at a screening. But if you're just at like the AMC in Dallas, you don't need to applaud the movie. The actors don't know.
Okay, that I'll agree with. But how do you feel about, and this will be the last one. How do you feel about, like, for example, we'll go back to Endgame or Infinity War. I forget which one's the last one at this point. 'Cause I've been
It's
going for a
Endgame.
minute. Yeah, thank you. When On Your Left is said and everybody comes out, I was there. People were hooting, hollering, and
Yes.
clapping and
I knew
stuff.
exactly what scene you were going to bring up. And when Cap picked up the hammer too, everybody's screaming.
Yes, yes. Or more recently, when Andrew Garfield and
Yes.
Tobey Maguire walked out of the portal. Like, for me, contextually, opening night stuff, like when you don't know what happens, I do think it adds a certain,
It
that is part of the magic of the movie. And if you say otherwise, you're a hater.
No, I actually was going to say so. Like, I don't typically do that myself. It's not my typical reaction.
Or is it mine?
However, and like I will say, this needs to be restricted to opening weekend, like when the movie is fresh. If you're seeing the movie for the fourth time and you're still doing that, you are a spaz.
Straight to jail.
But
Yeah.
but I do actually think it's part of as much as I part of me hates it, part of me also loves it. It's part of the cinematic experience of seeing a movie like that that's very fan driven with other fans. It makes it an experience as opposed to watching it on my couch.
Yeah, it's a community event at that
Yes.
point, and there is a shared like communal reaction, and
Yeah, like when Han and Chewie
situation
first
is
showed
pretty
up in Force
magical.
Awakens, before we all knew the new movies were gonna suck, when Force Awakens came out and Han and Chewie first show up on the screen and everybody cheered, like that's okay for me because like I grew up with the characters too, and like yeah, it's like I'm in a community of people who get it. So
Okay, but did you gasp at all when Kylo stopped the blaster bolt?
I didn't gasp. I thought it was cool, but I didn't
You were
gasp.
like, because I remember I was like, I had a little bit of
I
that.
do remember thinking it was cool, and then I remember thinking how nothing else in the movie lived up to that. It's like you set it up so well. Like this guy is awesome, and then everything else was so
He's
dumb.
got the cool crossguard thing, and then he's just like really emo
The
and
fact that he was
stuff.
able to stop a blaster bolt at all, like that was we'd never seen that in a Star Wars movie. And it could have been so cool. Like Force
He
Awakens
stopped
had so much
light.
potential.
He stopped light.
But yeah, so I actually don't have a problem with people doing that stuff. Again, in context, it needs to be like opening weekend, first time people are seeing the movie when it's not a well-known thing. Um,
Okay, that's
but
fair.
I don't like
That's
it when people are doing it. Like when I know you've seen the movie like 4 times and you're still doing it, or you're watching it on your couch for the 10th time. Like, okay, dude, you know Tobey Maguire's coming out of that thing. It's not new anymore. It's just like you just know. Like I will say like there are scenes in movies that will either choke me up, like they still hit, like the Fast Seven, the last really good Fast and Furious movie where Brian O'Connor and Dom Toretto break off,
that
like
damn Charlie
that
Pugh song.
right
See
here,
you
man.
again.
And then or the biggest one to me is Aragorn, crowned king. My friends, you bow to no one. Like
That's a
still
good one.
every time, like man, that's awesome. But I don't like cheer because I've seen it 1,000 times.
Yeah, you get chills, which you internalize. You don't
I keep it to
externalize it
myself.
anymore. Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's exactly. It's internalized after the first week.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's how it needs to be.
Laws have been written. Laws have been made. So shall it be written. So shall it be done.
And that's where we'll end it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Turn on notifications if you're subscribed so you see every time a new episode drops. Thanks for being with us.
Everybody says that. We don't need to.
I feel like we have to. I don't know. Maybe we won't.
You can edit this. Cut this. Cut this. Cut this.
We got to discuss this.